Hi, this is Rich working on my 1995 115 horsepower Mercury again. It is a 95 model, but it was built in late 1994, so I have the 4-coil ignition system. I do not have the CDMs. Problems with my, turns out to be my stator, but I did not know what the problem was at the time. Last fall, we had some problems when we were out fishing. It would run fine. We'd get up on plane, run a few miles, but if you let it get below 1200 RPMs, it would just die, just like you pulled the kill switch or turned the ignition off. It was not fuel starved. We would crank and crank and crank, and finally it would start up again, and we were able to get back to the dock. The next morning, we needed to put it on the trailer to take it home, and it started right up without any issues. Took it home, put it up on blocks, and it was done for the winter. Took it out this spring, started up at the dock, went out to the first fishing spot. We were up on plane, full throttle, and it would idle down as we got into the fishing spot, and it died. It did this a couple of times, and then it just refused to start anymore. After that, I was able to start it in the driveway a few times, but only when it was dead cold. First pulled it out of the garage, started it up, turned it off, tried to turn it on again. After that, it would not do it. A lot of people said it was fuel starved, so I rebuilt the fuel pump. I did it with this this particular model. I have a separate video for that. It was not difficult to do that. Check the stop circuit. So the stop circuit is when you turn the key off or when you use the kill switch to turn the engine off. To test the stop circuit, you need to disconnect 2 wires from the switch box. The 2 wires are on the same terminal, and they are both black wires with a yellow tracer on them. Disconnect them and then connect your multimeter to each wire separately. Connect it to the wire and then connect it to a good ground, and then turn the ignition key to the on position. Don't start the motor, don't crank the motor. Just let it stay in the on position and then take your voltage reading. Do each wire independently, and you should not have more than 2 volts on each wire. If you do, then you have a problem in the stop circuit that is preventing the electricity from going to the spark plugs, and that's what's causing the failure. I have a black stator. It has these 6 wires on there. The later models have a red stator with only 4. I replaced, both of these are CDI. I replaced not only the stator, but the switch box as well. Mercury recommends that if you replace the stator, you replace the switch box because they're related. If one goes bad, it can take the other one out. The other component that's under the flywheel is the trigger, and the trigger, if it goes out, it doesn't harm anything. It's more or less independent. But if you have a bad stator or if you have a bad switch box, then you replace both of those components. The service manual tests that I ran, they didn't match up with anything that I did on my old stator or on the new one once I got the new one. The comparisons that I ran were the red wire to the red and white wire on the stator, and that should have some resistance on it. That's the high speed, and then there's a low speed. It's the blue and white stripe, and there should be resistance on that as well. On the old stator on my motor, there was no resistance between blue and white, but there was on the new one when I got it. So I kind of figured that that was the problem, especially since the blue one is the low speed and it would not start. Tools used. The tools that I used, the socket that goes on top of for the nut on the flywheel is a 15/16, and I used a breaker bar for that. I used a Zinger model 91-849154T1 flywheel remover, and how this works is you have a small piece like this that fits on the inside. You back this out as far as it will go. After you get the flywheel and washer out of there, this screws down into the top of it, but you don't go all the way. You go all the way and then back off just a little bit, but this should remain loose. This fits with the flat side up, and the conical side will go to the down, and that protects the drive shaft on there. And then once this is screwed in, then as you turn this nut down, it puts pressure on the drive shaft, and this in turn pulls up on the flywheel, and it will pop off, and you'll see that in a later video. Another tool that I have is the flywheel remover. I'm sorry, the flywheel holder, or turner as it's called. This is a Lyle. It's a 23800. I used it. It worked very well to get the flywheel off, but when I tried to put it back on, I did have a problem, and you'll see that later in the video. And I bought it, but I didn't use it. It was Lyle inline spark tester 20610. It did not cost much. It was less than $11 to buy that, but it's a handy tool to have. That's enough talking for right now. Let's go on out to the garage and we can get the flywheel off and take a look at the stator. Before you start to work on your motor, there's a couple of items you want to do to make sure that the motor doesn't start. Remove all the spark plug wires. Just get them out of the way. That way that even if it gets a stray spark from something, it won't fire. Of course, my motor's not starting no matter what I do. But safety first. And the other thing is you want to disconnect the negative wires from your battery. So there's two in particular. This heavy one goes, it's the ground for the motor connections. And then this goes up to the dashboard and provides the ground for all of your electric connections up there. I still have two connectors on here. I have an onboard charger that is down there. And I also have a set of lights here to monitor the voltage on my batteries. So those are staying connected so the battery stays charged, but it's not connected to the motor in any way. So safety first, just make sure you got all your spark plug wires disconnected and the ground wires to your battery from the motor. I have removed the flywheel cover, and there's a little small yellow plastic cap that goes where that nut is, and that came out. I'll leave that in there. I had it in for service and somebody threw it away, so I had to buy another one. Just love technicians. I have removed the bolts to expose the lower part of the motor just so I could do some testing on some of the wiring. In case you haven't done this, there's a clip bolt here, two bolts here to hold that clip in. That holds the cover down when you put it on, so you remove that. And then there's two bolts way back here that go in through this left side there and into this. The only way I've been able to get that in is I have a small 3/8 inch air tool that lets me get down in there at an angle, straight angle. But there's a bolt that goes in here and a bolt that goes in up here, right there, and they are 5/16, and the only easiest way that I've been able to get in there is with this air tool that is at an angle. And you got to be careful because it will, as you can see, I think one of the mechanics that's worked on this has split down there and then they filled it in again, but they are brass fittings inside there, threaded fittings. So those two need to come out, and then one more is way down here. You see that hole that is right in line with that groove that's in the bottom of the motor housing there. There's a 5/16 inch bolt that goes in there, so you need a kind of a long extension. I use a 1/4 inch drive and take that one out. That's the one that's usually the one that most people miss. Okay, this is the switch box. And these are the lines coming in off of the stator. So this is the stator wiring, and then this is the trigger here. And you can follow both of these lines back up to the engine here. So the stator lines, starter motor here, stator lines come in here, and the trigger lines coming in here out from underneath. And once we get this flywheel off, then we'll be able to see those two objects. So on the stator, you've got the red and the blue, and then you got red with a white stripe and blue stripe. There are two yellow wires that come out, and these go to these two yellow wires here. They go to the rectifier, the voltage regulator, and there's a black wire, a ground wire also. Well, kind of difficult to think. I'm wrong. Black wire comes out of the trigger along with a purple, a white, and a brown. Looks gray, but it's really a brown, kind of an off brown. It connects in with this brown here that goes down to the rev limiter. So I'm not, between these two, I'm not getting anything. That comes out as 0, and then between the red and the ground, motor ground, it's coming out extremely high. The purple and white and brown testing up here comes out okay. And those, that's a good one. And the other one I was telling you about is this one here. Now that looks like it's a black wire, but if we rotate it just a little, you can see that it's got a yellow stripe on it, and so does this other one here. And that one goes to the rev limiter back in there. But anyway, you carefully remove this, take off the nut, take those two wires off of there, and then test, hook your multimeter to each one individually. Positive lead on here, and then the negative lead somewhere on the motor ground, which is usually someplace where you see this yellow. That's a motor ground, and red here. You don't want to put it on that. That's high voltage, or not high, but it's 12 volt voltage. And then you go up, turn the key, the oil warning will will beep, and then you'll get voltage. You measure the voltage. It should not be above 2 volts. If it is, then you've got something wrong with your stop circuit. Mine did not test bad. I'm not going to go down that route. So what we want to do now, I think I've tested all the wires. You want to make sure that all these are I'd take them apart and dry them out, just because of the oil that gets in them from the two-stroke. It leaks all over the place, so you get a lot of oil in here. So I take those, open them up, clean them up, put them back together again. Another place that you want to be careful of is on your you want to be careful of your voltage regulator up here. I've had some wires that they get hot in these connectors, these bullet connectors here, and they've just the resistance that's in the connector itself. So in the past I've opened these up, clean them all up, get them real nice and clean, and seal them back up again. You want to get them bone dry in there, and that prevents that overheating. I think some of this was from a previous voltage regulator. It was getting up to 19 volts, and I think that's a little bit too much to get in there. I didn't have bullet connectors. I used a butt splice, and then this is thick, heavy sheet shrink in here. Just cut the wire if you need to replace this voltage regulator. I don't like these bullets because of what is happening here. If it's a straight line, then it's less chance of any kind of resistance building up in there. I think that's also, now I'm ready to show you about, take off the flywheel. So on the flywheel, we have a 15/16, and I've got a breaker bar on here. All right. So that's on my left-hand side because we want to go counterclockwise on this. Motor rotation, you can always tell it by where you would put the emergency cord on here to pull it. So if you're going to pull it this way, it's going to rotate clockwise. All right. So that's how you know that that's the way it rotates. And by the way, the rope starter is just to make you look pathetic, so some other boater will come along and maybe give you a tow. And then the other part here is where the, now I don't have a cameraman, so you have to bear with me. You have to be careful with this thing that you don't damage any of these screws that are on here. So what needs to happen is you want to get, I think I can put them here. So you want to put one, you want to put the tooth in that side. All right, so that's in there. And then on this side, you need to come back. We're going to put the tooth in one of those, the tooth on the tool to the between the teeth on the wheel. Then you want to move this handle forward so you can get a grip on one of these teeth down here. Okay, so that's what it's supposed to look like. You've got a little bit of an angle so that you have a nice grip here that you can hold this. And then what I'm going to do is I've got it in my right hand, and then I've got this, and going to have this in my left hand, and that's going to give me the leverage that I need to unscrew this bolt that's on here. They caution you not to use a hammer or heat on this. Both bad. Near the top of the screen you can see the fixed tooth is engaged in the flywheel, and more towards the middle you can see the movable tooth is engaged in the flywheel as well. So we have this wheel tool here to hold this wheel in place. So we're going to pull on it to the right. We're going to pull on this to the left, so they're both going towards one another. And that will allow us to hold this wheel steady while we turn this nut. I prepared this for the video. It's not quite that easy, but it's not much more difficult either to go on there. So we have taken the nut off. We have our large nut on the top, and then there is a washer that is down below that. So after we got the nut out, then there was a really thick washer that's down on the inside. I used a couple of really strong earth magnets attached to some screwdrivers and kind of a nut driver that I put down there, and I was able to pull it out. I don't know if it needed to be out, but it is out. And that is, now we have our other tool. So you take the nut, bring it all the way into the very top. Okay, that's up in the top. And then we have this plug that goes in here. Now, it has a cone on one side and it's flat on the other, and there's no instructions for this thing. This is the section on the flywheel. It is the removal and the installation. It does both. They caution you to disconnect the spark plug wires, and as I've already said, you disconnect the negative post on the battery. And they want you to install the protector cap. We put a little dab of grease on that cone for the tool. There is a second piece that goes inside. It doesn't have any instructions. One side is this conical shape and the other side is flat. So I've greased both sides of this. I have greased the threads on here with some 30 weight oil. I have greased the threads on this with some 30 weight oil, and that's per the instructions that were on Amazon. And it said to put oil on the threads on the inside, which I would assume went from this. All this really needs to do is just to hold this in place while this other bolt goes down. I saw some instructions that said this is reverse threaded, but it is not. Anyway, I just went down there as far as it would go. You don't need to tighten this. You don't need to tighten this bottom part. It just needs to go down as far as it'll go. Just that's all, because it just needs to hold in place. This is the one that's going to do all the job. So we're going to put a 1 1/4 inch box end wrench on here. And I'll slide right down on that. And then this is the same nut bolt. Sorry. This is 15/16. Wow. Flywheel is off. Have to put this someplace safe. And there is a keyway. It doesn't have far to fall, but it is there. So I'm not going to take that out because it seems to be fine. Once the flywheel is off, and believe me, that surprised me when it popped like that. I thought the bolt broke, because that's exactly what it feels like if you've ever snapped off a bolt. So there's the stator. That's the one on the outside. Trigger is the one that's on the inside. You can see there's the connecting going out to the stator, and here's the one that goes up to the trigger, and you can see the purple and white wires in there. There are 4 hex bolts, hex screws that hold this down, and there's a Allen key, we call them. You just need to take that out, and then the stator should come right off. I'm going to go ahead and order the new part, and it definitely looks very different than this one, because everything where you see all these little coils on here, everything is on here is sealed in plastic, and the new one, everything is exposed. This is a picture of the new stator I just ordered. With the old stator here on the workbench, I can now see that this was never really connected to this. This is just a plastic sleeve that is, I guess, designed to protect it. But I did my continuity tests. I'm sorry, I did the ohms test between the blue and the red wire, and that is infinite. There's no reading there at all. I then did a continuity test from this connector here and this blue connector here all the way up to here, and the wire is good. So there's continuity, yet there's no reading, so that means there's something inside the stator that's gone bad. There's another test that you're supposed to be able to do, but I don't see how you could do it with this off the motor, because it's supposed to be between this red lead and ground, motor ground. I tried on some of the metal parts on here, which is the only place that I could see that where the 4 bolts would bolt down into the frame of the engine block, but it did not give me any reading at all. It was also open, and these other 2 wires, there's no test for those, and I was not having any problem with the yellow wires, which is what produces voltage for the to charge the battery with. So the new stator is on order. It should be arriving here tomorrow, but the switch box doesn't get here until Friday. So hopefully I can test that, get the parts on tomorrow and Friday, and then give it a test. So the new stator arrived, and with that, it allowed me to compare some of the readings off of the old versus the new. So of the 4 wires, and I'm going to disregard the yellow wires because they're fine. The stator was charging my batteries, so I know that those 2 yellow wires are okay. So we're concerned with the red, the blue, the red with a white wire, and the blue with a white wire. One is high speed, one is low speed. So on the old one, all of the wires cross-reference red to blue, red to red with white, and so on. There's only one that gave me any reading at all. So red to red with white stripe gave me a reading of 94.4. When I got the new one, there was only two that gave me any reading at all. They were the red to the red with a white stripe. That gave me 29.7. And remember, on the old one, it gave me 94.4. I have no idea what that means. And the other one was blue to blue with a white stripe, and that's 564.9 ohms. Now, on the old one, I got nothing. And I believe this is the low speed one, which means that on low speed, it was not giving me any electricity, no output at all. And that's probably why it would not generate enough electricity for the engine to start. So anyway, I did get the new stator, and then the next day the switch box arrived. So I had both pieces that I needed, and I proceeded to do the install. So the service manual says that there are two types of stators. There is a small rim stator and a large rim. Mine is the small rim, and mine was early 95 model, which was made in the fall of 94. It has an alignment on here, and of course this applies to the small rim stator. The replacement I am just putting back on in exactly the same position as the original stator was, and it says to apply the Loctite 222 to the threads and then torque them to 60 inch-pounds. And the large rim stator alignment is this way, but according to the installation manuals for the CDI electronics, it just says to line up the cord that comes off of the bottom of the stator, to make note of where it is when you take it off. And in this case, it's kind of towards the back here. On mine, when I took it off, I could see where the screws had been on the stator. These D on here, and the cord actually came out back here, and then down the side of the motor. And there's a groove in there for that. And we'll take a look up here, so you can see that my cord is coming out back here. And that's where it was. And then there's only 4 holes for these. So you have to get that lined up. And then this cord will come down. There's a groove in the motor right here on the head. And that's where that cord comes down. And it will eventually get tied up in here, and I'll show you that later. But for right now, I just have these wires on here so I can do a driveway test. Unfortunately, it's pouring down rain today. I think it's supposed to stop this afternoon, so maybe I'll look out and get a chance to do that. So I got a new stator off of Amazon.
CDI says their product is better because it's made in America and is not encapsulated in plastic like OEM, which allows heat to collect and thereby shortens the life of the product.
You have to make sure that you get the right one for your particular model motor. Be sure to check the specs. I also got a new switch box, which they say if you replace the stator, you should replace the switch box, because if one is damaged, it can damage the other one. So I replaced all of that. It's also a CDI, so they should work together. I did not know if that was going to fix my problem, and I wanted to be able to return the stator if that did not fix it. So what I have done is make kind of a Frankenstein connection here. It comes with these barrel couplers, and mine uses a different type of connector. It's a rubber cap, and then it just has a circle or ring connector that's on there. So I took the old switch box off and put the new one on, and then transferred the wires over one by one. So the only thing I had left was the stator wires, and I made an extension. I had some white wire, and I just colored it with a magic marker to emulate the ones that it's going to connect with here. And I had some yellow wire, which worked out well because these are the connections that go to the voltage regulator up in here. So I've put the new stator back on. I've run the wires down. The instructions say when you take off the old one that you should note where the wire comes down the bundle, the connector wire, and then put the new one in the same place. So I have done that. And then this wire will connect down this way once I do the test on this, rebundle and whatnot. But I'm just going to do a driveway test first to make sure that everything is okay. What else? Oh, these, I have to look up the torque on these, and that should be flashing on the screen right now as to what the torque specification is. They also say to use Loctite 222. I have found that on Amazon, but I could not find it any place locally. I have some 242, which is kind of a mid-range. Some of these are pretty stiff with, I would assume, the factory Loctite 222 that was on there. And I'm just going to do the screws that have that are real easy to turn, that they don't have any Loctite on them. So I'll put some of the 242 on that, and then I'll torque them down properly. There's also torque on the switch box here on these. There's 4 of these 5/16 screws on here, and those are 40 inch-pounds. So I'm gonna finish installing this, torquing this down, and then I will put the flywheel back on top, and then that gets torqued to 100 pounds. So you have to pay attention as to where the little key is right here, and there will be a matching slot in the flywheel. And I think that should be about it. I have replaced the lower cowling on here, and again, here's this plate that's up here. There's these, I think that's a 10 millimeter metric. Now, some of the screws on here are nuts and bolts, are metric, and some are SIE. I don't know, but anyway, that's it. So those are the 2 that go on there. And then, as I said before, down here there are these 2 bolts. That one down there on the bottom is a real pain to get to. The only way I've been able to reach that is with my pneumatic tool, and that's at a right angle. So if you don't have access to something like that, I wish you luck, because it was a real hassle to get that off. I was able to do it with a small ratchet. It just takes a very, very long time because it's close quarters and it is at an angle. And then finally, of course, our favorite screw down here. That's that 5/16 long one that holds the cowling together also. And as you can see, I still got my spark plug wires off for safety's sake. Okay, we have put our stator on and torqued it to 60 inch-pounds. We have now dropped the flywheel back on top, and you can see the down at about the 3 o'clock position. Right there is the keyway, so you can actually look down through that hole as you're installing it and find the key, because there's a big magnet on this thing and it wants to stick to everything under the sun. But eventually found the keyway, and everything drops right down into place, so it's sitting on top. We're going to put our washer, if it wants to cooperate. Okay, the washer goes on, and then the bolt itself, the bolt goes on, and then we're going to torque that to 100 pounds. Manual says that goes to 100 pounds. It did not mention anything about Loctite, and I would be very surprised if there was any Loctite on that at all. So anyway, I get out the old torque wrench and the thing that holds the flywheel, and I'll torque it to 100 foot-pounds. So we've put everything back together. Now we're ready to torque down the top nut on the flywheel. Don't forget, remove the spark plug wires and disconnect the battery before you do this. Even if you have the fuel line disconnected, there's fuel in the carburetor, most likely, and you're going to generate the electricity necessary to possibly fire this thing up. Even if it doesn't catch, it may pop one. So safety first, disconnect all these spark plug wires. Put in your flywheel holder, and be sure to avoid all these posts that the top cap will screw down onto, these 4 posts here. You want to avoid everything, and then you want to turn clockwise and rotate to 100 foot-pounds. This is a click type wrench, so it would click when it goes on. I have already done this, so I'm not going to do it again. It was difficult for me. If you have someone else that can help you, that would be great. And then when you're done, if you've had that torque, you obviously want to put on the top cap again. I put my little yellow cap back in. And then put on your 4 nylon tie downs on the cap. Well, the flywheel puller that I had such high praise for initially, when I tried to put the flywheel back on, gave me problems. So these, this pin goes down into this groove, and there's 2 pins up here that go into these holes. I have smacked my left hand thumb several times, so you can see here's the pins, and they've pulled out of here. I think they're bent. I did hit right at 100 pounds. I could feel that it was that it had clicked, but as soon as I got the one click, this spring popped out. It does not hold it into the flywheel anymore, and I can't get a second click, which I usually like to get for just to make sure that I've got it in there right. So I no longer recommend this Lyle tool, and I'll be contacting them about this. So a little follow-up. I did contact Lyle Tool about the issue that I was having. They said that they would pass the information along to their technical department for review to see if there's anything that they could do about improving the tool. In the meantime, they went ahead and sent me another one. It's exactly the same one as before, the model 23800. I think if I had to use this one again, that I would find something to hold it in place on the flywheel while I was holding the handle. In other words, something that would grip both of these prongs on here into the flywheel. And I don't know if that would be rope or wire or tape or whatever, but it definitely needs something to hold it in there if you're going to put any kind of torque on this. If you had someone else to help you with this, that would be much better, because you could each be on a different section of the flywheel, one to hold it, one to be torquing it. So anyway, I was very pleased with their response, so I'll have to give them like 5 stars on their customer support, but I'm only giving it 2 stars on the tool itself until they find some way of improving it. So I'm going to remove some of these cables to help me get out the different parts. So these are 14.5 foot-pounds. 14.5 foot-pounds for these 2. And this cable here is 60 inch-pounds. 60 inch-pounds. Okay, she's reassembled except for the top cowling I've not done. And I gave you all the specifications for torque specifications for that. This is a final look-see before I drag it outside and start it up. Driveway test. Everything worked out really well. It started up right away, just like when it was brand new. I let it run for a while. I turned it off, let it sit for a few minutes, started it up again. Started up just fine. Idled perfectly. I have no complaints about it, so I'm ready for the lake. So I took out all my Frankenstein wiring, and replaced it with the original caps that I had. The CDI provided the forked connectors with no covers on them, and I would prefer to have something that would cover up these terminals from moisture and what have you. Some of the Mercuries that came out and they had the bullet connectors. That's what the CDI part came with. The Stator came with the bullet connectors. Again, I don't have those, but if you use those, I'm sure that's more than adequate to use it. And then Mercury calls them stay straps, but they're zip ties. That's what I call them, tie wraps, to make sure that everything is nice and secured on here, doesn't flop around. And other than that, I'm ready to take it out to the lake and see how she does. Unfortunately, I'm going by myself, so there won't be anybody to take video, but I will give a report when I return and let you know how things worked out. Okay, so I had replaced the stator and the switch box and did a driveway test, and everything turned out quite well. So I was very pleased and anxious to get down to the lake. So a few days later, I went down to the lake, took the boat down there. The motor started up right away. Turned it off at the dock, parked the car, went back, started up, no problems. Got out to the lake middle and started it up and got up to 4,900, 4,800 RPM, which was about 40 miles an hour. It's running nice and smooth, nice and easy, no problems. Kicked it up a little bit more. I was going to go full throttle. It got to 5,000 RPM and it just shut down on me. Don't know why. I don't think that it was the upper limit because it's supposed to get to 5,200 RPMs, but there was definitely something going on. If I held it at full throttle, it would go up to 5,000, it would stall and drop back down, and as soon as it did, it would jump back up again. So I was doing this up and down kind of thing with the motor. Went below 5,000, went down to 4,900 RPM and drove several miles that way without any problems. So knew I had to try something else. So on the second trip, before the second trip, I removed the wire from the rev limiter. It's the black wire with the yellow tracer line on it. I removed that from the switch box and left the other, there's two of them on the same post on the switch box. Left the other one on there, that's for shutting it down in the kill switch. So I left those in place. Went down to the lake, again went up to full throttle, and it went up to 45 miles an hour, 5,200 RPMs, and was just doing just fine. Didn't have any problem all day fishing that day. So then I knew it either had to be the switch box or the rev limiter. So on the third trip, I put the OEM switch box back on again. Now that's a little dangerous because Mercury says that if you replace the switch box or the stator, you should replace both. But I wasn't really having any problems that it wasn't a sudden shutdown of the stator, so I knew I was taking a chance, but I put it on there anyway. Reconnected the wire from the rev limiter, and it behaved just like the first time that I went down. I got up to 5,000 RPM and the engine shut down.
This snapshot was taken when I was on the water, and you can see I reached 5,200 RPM.
So now I know that it's not the switch box, it has to be the rev limiter. Now the rev limiter is only 3 years old. I've already had to replace that once for a different issue. So a new one is on order. We'll see how that does on the next update. So the new rev limiter arrived and I installed it, took the boat down to the lake, and it still just dropped out at about 4,900 to 5,000 RPM. So I just disconnected the rev limiter completely. The boat's running fine. It gets up to 5,200 RPM and runs just the way I like it. So I'm happy with it. I'm done with it. And I hope this video has helped you.